What's up people, hope you're having an awesome day. I'm your host Ayman Hassan and welcome back to another video here at Most Amazing Top 10. I would kill to live on an island, honestly, have a beach wherever you go, don't have to talk to or see anyone you don't like, you're just free to literally do you and live your life. You know, other than the fact I don't know how much food or electricity would be on this island, so I mean it could go very wrong for me, but I mean, and it's also very hard to escape an island, especially if there's like a cannibalistic tribe living there or an axe murderer. I mean, there's just pros and cons, I guess. But enjoyable islands aside, here are the top 10 scary islands nobody wants to live on. Starting us off with number 10 is Isla de las Muñecas, I hope I said that right, or also known as the Island of the Dolls. Now this island is just south of Mexico City and has quite the story. Don Julian Santana Barrera was the caretaker of this island, and one day he found a little girl drowned by the water. He had no idea how she had died and he was unable to save her, and a few hours later he saw a doll floating near the canal which he assumed was most likely that girl's. Out of respect for the girl, he took the doll and hung it on one of the trees on the island, and that's how it all began. After that point, it's said that Julian started getting haunted by this girl, and in an attempt to appease his spirit, he started hanging more dolls all around the island. Those close to Julian said he changed after that period. It's like an unseen force started driving him to make these dolls his life. After 50 years of collecting dolls and hanging them, Julian was found drowned in the exact same place he had found that girl's body. Many believe Julian made up the story in his solitude, but I feel like 50 years of sticking to a fake story is a bit much. And despite thousands of people living on the island currently, most of them believe the spirit of the girl, Julian, and the dolls heavily haunt and protect the island. Many have seen the dolls move and have heard whispers coming from them, so I mean, I've given you the information, the rest is up to you whether you want to move there or not. I've done my bit. Coming in at number 9 is Star Island. Located in the city of Miami Beach, Star Island is actually a man-made island that was completed in 1922. You can access the island quite easily by land or by barrier islands, and it's had a lot of famous residents over the years like Shaq, Emilio and Gloria Estefan, P. Diddy, etc. But despite the celeb appeal, it's actually been the site of a lot of horror. The Oceanic Hotel was built on the island in 1873 but burned down 2 years later. When the owners rebuilt it, there were many reports of the 4th floor of the new hotel being haunted, with guests saying they could hear furniture being dragged around in empty rooms and doors opening and closing when no one was there. They would also hear scratches at their window and voices along with those scratches. People speculated it was the guests that had died in the previous hotel that were haunting the new one. Now for horror number 2. 20 years prior, Reverend George Beebe moved there to preach on the island. The fresh sea air also made it a very popular area for tuberculosis patients to come visit, and the Reverend held a lot of sermons for them, not knowing 5 years later all 3 of his daughters would get the illness and die. The girls were buried in the cemetery he made, and he left the island soon after that, and I really can't blame the man. But many tourists have seen the girls running in the cemetery and heard them giggling as they've been close to their graves. Others have even heard the whispering of small children reciting Bible verses. Wow, they really are holier than thou. Last but not least, if ghosts were bad enough, people believe that vampires also inhabit the island. Since it used to be a TB camp way back when, historically New England vampires were born after dying from TB, so there's that link there as well. Could this be the new set of Twilight? I don't really know. At number 8 we have Hart Island, also known as the Island of the Dead. Off to a great start here clearly. Located in New York, and honestly this island has been through it. It used to be the location of a psychiatric institution, a prison war camp, a boys' reformatory school, a tuberculosis sanatorium, a rehab center, a jail, and a potter's field. Was there anything happy on that list? I really don't think so. More than 1 million people are buried on the island, many of which weren't claimed by their families or were homeless. Access to the island is restricted unless you're a family member of someone buried there, and even then you need to request access beforehand. From the name you can probably guess that many people believe the island is haunted, and with that many people buried there it'd be impossible if it wasn't. No one has the option to live there, but I don't think anyone would even if they did. Filling our number 7 slot is Alcatraz Island, and Lord knows this one had to be on the list. If there's one island that has a notoriously bad reputation that everyone knows, it's Alcatraz. Located in San Francisco Bay, the island is home to the oldest operating lighthouse on the west coast and a very well known abandoned prison. Now before the prison, the island was inhabited by Native Americans for thousands of years, and and even they kept tribal members there who broke the rules. By 1934, it was turned into a maximum security prison, and during the 29 years the prison was in use, the penitentiary claimed no prisoner ever escaped successfully. 36 tried, 23 were caught, 2 drowned, 6 were shot while trying to escape, and 5 were never found and presumed dead. Al Capone was in there, George Machine Gun Kelly, Alvin Creepy Carpus. So many notorious criminals were held in Alcatraz. The island is oozing history. The guards were very well trained to guard the men, but they had no clue about rehabilitation. They used to torture the inmates verbally and physically, and inmates would do it to each other as well. Now, a lot of horrible things happened on this island, and there are specific rooms and cells where a variety of ghostly sightings and activities have been reported by visitors, rangers, and even prisoners. Whispering has been heard in the cells, you can see phantom figures looming in the corridors, cell doors locking and unlocking, cold spots in random parts of the prison, and even the sound of musical instruments being played. Apparently, every single guard and official who served there experienced something out of the ordinary. Now at number 6 is Dead Man's Island. Located in Vancouver, Dead Man's Island was a site of a lot of death, as you guys got from the title. It had been a native tree burial cemetery in the past, and when the first white settlers went there, they found hundreds of red cedar boxes attached to trees, and after one fell and opened, they found a bunch of bones and a tassel of black hair, which were the remains of the Squamish people. When the settlers tried to acquire the island, they were warned by Chief Capilano of the fact the island is dead ground. A battle had taken place between 2 tribes, the North and South nations, over claims to the island. During the battle, 200 kids, women, and elders were captured by the South and held captive. In exchange for them, 200 northern warriors traded themselves in and were all killed on the spot. And if that's not enough death, in the late 1800s, the island was transformed into a quarantine site for victims of smallpox, and those who didn't survive are still buried there. The island was then the location of a logging dispute when Theodore Ludgate wanted to make it a lumber mill, and as soon as he tried to cut down a tree, he was arrested, but it was said they could hear shrieking and rattling bones when they tried to. Hence, no one has tried to cut down any trees since. Recent residents say they've heard footsteps in their house when no one else was on the island, and that they can see a glow coming from the trees that sometimes sharpens into a person. Coming in at number 5 is Okonoshima Island. 3 kilometers away from the coast of Japan, you can get to Okonoshima Island by ferry. And it's a nice island, honestly. There are walking trails for tourists, campsites, historical sites. It's not just an overgrown jungle. People refuse to live on the island for many reasons. For one, the island was used during the Russo-Japanese War, where it was chosen to start developing chemical weapons. Construction, development, and storage were all kept a secret, and residents and workers weren't even told what the plant was making, despite many of them suffering from toxic exposure-related sicknesses. The place used to produce over 6 kilotons of tear gas and mustard gas. The island was far enough from Tokyo that it didn't really pose a threat to it, but after the war was over, everything was burned or destroyed, and everyone was told to basically not say anything about it. But even now, nobody lives on the island, well, unless you count the fact that it's overrun with rabbits who aren't even native to that part of the world. Rabbit Island, as some call it, has so many rabbits because they all descended from the first ones let loose on the island when they tried to turn it into a park after the war. They also used the rabbits to test the chemical weapons on, but the ones on the island now are not related to the mutated ones. I don't know how they can even prove that, but sure. At number 4 is Ellis Island. Located in New York Harbor, the island used to be America's busiest immigrant inspection station for 60 years. 12 million immigrants passed through the island in that time, and 240,000 of them were rejected for health reasons. 3,000 of those either died in the hospital there or committed suicide. So the structures on the island are as follows. There's a massive main building that has a kitchen, storage space, dorms, a bakery, etc. Then there's the ferry building, and finally the main hospital building. Families were separated when kids would be accepted, but their sick parents would not, so the building has a very teary past. Over the years, nurses and technicians admitted they'd hear voices and smell burning candles coming from the Great Hall despite it being empty. The whispers of crying children can also be heard all over the building, even long after there were no kids there. I don't know why this whole separating kids and parents thing is reminding me a whole lot of what's going on in America right now, but that's none of my business. Filling our number 3 slot is Corregidor Island. Now this island is located near the entrance of Manila Bay in the Philippines, and because of its location, the island has always had coastal artillery on it to defend Manila from enemy warships. During World War II, the island played a major role in in freeing the Philippines from Japanese forces. In 1942, Japanese forces took over the island where they starved and tortured over 3,000 Filipinos and Americans. The island was ambushed again during the latter part of the war, and in 1945, the Americans wanted to recapture the island, which resulted in nearly 7,000 Japanese soldiers dying and 1,000 deaths on the American-Filipino side. I honestly feel like a history teacher. Do you guys agree? When this happened, it's said that 3,000 Japanese soldiers chose suicide over being captured, so they sealed themselves in tunnels and caves and died in there. It was one of the biggest mass suicides that had ever taken place. And people say there's more blood that's flown on this island than water, and that's saying something. If that doesn't deter you from wanting to live here, honestly, nothing will. Now number 2 is Norfolk Island. Located between New Zealand and Australia, the island was first home to East Polynesians, but they were long gone when the British got to it in 1788. After that point, the island was a convict penal settlement. Since it was so remote, the British used it to house their most violent criminals, and many used to describe it as hell on earth. Why? Because since the early 1800s, the amount of rape, torture, and murder that's taken place on the island is endless because of the thousands and thousands of criminals that lived there. Forget the criminals, even the guards were vicious. The island is actually the 4th most haunted island in the world, and with everything that's happened there, are any of you really surprised? So if you want to move somewhere that's been dubbed hell on earth, be my guest, but I will not be joining you there. And finally, at number 1 is Pavilia Island. Located between Venice and Lido, the island's first record of existence was actually in 421 and was populated till 1379. By 1776, the island was used as a quarantine area for people suffering from the plague and other diseases, and this lasted more than a century. The area was then transformed into a mental hospital in 1922, where a doctor used to experiment on his patients with crude lobotomies. And if you've ever seen a lobotomy in a video or a movie, you know how screwed up they are. It's like the person just becomes a shell afterwards. Either way, after experimenting on his patients for years, he committed suicide by jumping from the hospital tower. Apparently, he'd gone mad from being haunted by so many ghosts, and I can definitely see why a bunch of patients would be angry with him after death and haunt him. The reasons are there. And I hate the thought of all derelict mental hospitals on a good day, but today particularly, I'm scared. The island is completely off limits to visitors and tourists, and I imagine the ghosts of all those dead people are very much still around. And that's it for today's video, guys. Honestly, I was all for islands at the beginning of this video, and now I'm just super put off and I don't even want a vacation on one. Let me know if any of you had heard any of these stories before the video and which one freaked you out the most. As always, I'm your host Eamon Hassan, and I'll see you next time. Bye!